Our next speaker is my colleague Sashko Stubailo, who will be talking about Apollo Client, a GraphQL client for any type of JavaScript framework, front-end framework, that is.
Great. Yeah, so you guys heard just now a bunch of stuff about backend GraphQL, but that's not usually where I live. I think for all of my programming life, I've been a front-end developer. I only learned how to write a line of PHP like maybe 4 years after I wrote my first line of HTML and then JavaScript. So anyway, that's a lot of cool stuff. But what I want to talk about is how do you put GraphQL data in your UI? There's a lot of great answers to this question, actually. If you probably Google around for GraphQL clients, there's a lot of different options out there. But I think the thing that I really want to focus on with Apollo Client is just answering this question in the most straightforward way humanly possible. Because GraphQL has a lot of really great tools that are really fun to use. For example, if you guys have used GraphQL at all, you might have seen this tool called Graphical, which I think is like the greatest thing handed down from the benevolent GraphQL dictators. I think it's the kind of thing where you can talk about GraphQL all you want, but I think this is the moment when you see this tool where you just explore your schema and you type the fields that you want and you get exactly the thing you asked for. I think that's when people, or at least that's when I really, really got it. And I was like, wow, like you can't do this with REST. Like, come on. There's like tons of services built around trying to do this with REST, and they're not really that good. Sorry, services. And I think like this is also the value is the GraphQL syntax. It's so nice because you could do the same thing and you could type out giant JSON objects with many fields. They could have lots of colons and brackets and fun stuff like that. But there's none of that here. It's just a very simple thing designed to do one thing, which is fetch data, and it feels great to use. And then you're like, okay, great. I've set up my GraphQL server. Maybe I used a backend as a service or something that gave me a GraphQL schema that I can explore with Graphical. But now what? Right? Now probably the next thing you want to do is build an app on top of that, because you're probably not going to give your users Graphical to play around with directly. You want to give them a UI. And what I found was there was a bit of a gap there where you have a lot of fun with Graphical. You can see exactly where it's going. But then it's not quite as easy to build an app on top of it as the syntax might suggest, as the experience using Graphical might suggest. Sometimes you have to do some complex setup. Perhaps you have to modify your schema to use something like Relay. Sometimes you can't always use the schema that you started out with. There's also not too many super great examples of full stack GraphQL apps out there. There's a couple, but there's nothing that I think really lets people get started super easily. So that's why we decided to build Apollo Client. And Apollo Client is a thing where you npm install Apollo Client, you copy and paste the query from Graphical into your JavaScript code, and you're done. You have the data in your UI. You've built an app on top of your GraphQL endpoint. And if you don't need any super special features, if all you want to do is display that data, then you're basically done. Let's go a little bit, check out what queries and mutations look like. And it's not very surprising. They look probably exactly like what you would expect, right? You take that query, you typed in the Graphical, you put that string into your UI code. It's highlighted in green here in my wonderful color scheme. You throw some variables in there. Variables are kind of like arguments to GraphQL queries. You can see that the feed query takes a feed type, which can be top or hot or one of these things you see on Reddit. And the same thing with mutations. A mutation in GraphQL is also a nice query that you can type into Graphical, and then you can paste into your app. And you can call it the same way you call any of your React callbacks, for example, just by passing in some arguments, and those get passed to the server, and the thing that you want happens. And specifically in the React integration for Apollo, we also have an Angular one. But in the React one, we have some very tight integration with Redux. So you can get your data from your props of your component, from the Redux state, or from the arguments that were passed into your mutation. So what kind of features can you expect from a GraphQL client? So it's pretty easy to imagine what happens when you send a single GraphQL query to the server. But real life is not as simple, right? You're not just having a read-only display of your data. So a lot of the features that you might want out of a GraphQL client come in when you either are modifying that data or you want to refetch it in different ways. So today, in Apollo Client, you can call mutations and have the data be refetched and integrated back into your store. You can pass polling intervals or manually refetch to get new data when you want to. And you can even wire up an external data source to pipe data directly into your client-side store and see that reflected in your UI components, right? So You might have a user type in your GraphQL schema. You can just get new data about that user from WebSocket, throw it into the store, and have that update your UI. And there's a lot of great features we're thinking about, calling them tomorrow's features, probably in the next month or two. But some of the great things that you would expect from a full-stack data loading system like optimistic UI, which is the ability essentially to have a fake mutation happen on the client before it actually comes back from the server. Some nice features around pagination, just to make it easier to fetch data when you already have some of it. And the ability to do some of what Relay's most flagship features are about, which is compose fragments from different UI components into larger queries when you want to reduce the number of round trips. So what is it that enables Apollo client, or is going to enable Apollo client, to have such a simple syntax where you just copy and paste the query, but yet have all these cool features you expect from your fancy clients, like refetching, pagination, all that kind of stuff. And it's really just three things. And these are three things that I think what I would say a sufficiently smart GraphQL client should have. The one thing it should have is a normalized cache. So just like Relay, you don't want to store the results of your GraphQL queries on the client as just giant blobs of JSON, because you can't really do much with that. Because if you do two queries for the same data and you're just storing them as is in your store, there's no way to understand that those two subtrees of the query represent the same data. So you can't do something like fetch a giant query that includes some newsfeed items and then update just one item by calling that smaller query. And that's something you can do once you have a normalized cache. With query manipulation, which is basically the ability to operate on queries before you send them to the server, or maybe even at build time so you don't have to do it at runtime, you can avoid typing certain fields, right? For example, if you always want to refetch the IDs of your objects, or you always want to fetch the type names of your objects because your UI depends on that or your logic depends on that, you should be able to do that automatically. And the last thing I think is a nice store. So Apollo Client gets this for free. Thanks, Dan. So Apollo Client is totally built on top of Redux. You don't have to care about the fact that it's built on top of Redux, but it was just a super simple model that let us have a totally serializable store that moves in very concrete steps and lets us implement some of these features like optimistic UI, server-side rendering, and store hydration with basically no code because it was always supported by Redux. And of course, as indicated by this tweet I saw a couple hours ago and thought it was really cool, it works with Redux dev tools. So if you've ever had a fancy data fetching system and you're wondering when is it fetching the data, what data is it fetching, why, you can now do that just by opening your Redux dev tools. If you're already using Redux, it integrates with your existing store, and just see what actions are going on there. Oh, okay, it decided to pull this time. Okay, it decided to send this mutation with these variables from my props. So let's check out an app. So I just have a couple of simple things I want to show you about this application. I'm not going to try to do any live coding. That didn't really work out too well last time I tried to do it. But this is the app that we're calling GitHunt. I guess I should show you the app first. That would probably be beneficial. So you can actually go to it yourself and go to githunt.com. And what this is kind of like Product Hunt for GitHub. We chose this particular example because it's both loading data from a local SQL database and also from the GitHub API, which demonstrates GraphQL's ability to paper over multiple data sources. So let me just show you a couple of the things that we already kind of talked about. One is the ability to load a query. So you can see here we have this feed query, and that has the stuff that we wanted. I actually was editing it earlier, so let me unedit it. Let's say we want to demonstrate one of these features. So let's say we want to, for example, add a poll interval. We'll refetch it every second. I said I wasn't going to do any live coding, but sorry. So we're going to npm start this. And so now, since we just added some really simple polling, what we can do is we can take this app, we can run it in multiple tabs, which is what you would expect. And then it doesn't work. Oh, I know. It's because I don't have my GitHub API key, so don't look at that. Because we're loading data from the GitHub API, obviously we can't run without it. So as you can see here, if I log in, that's what I get for trying to live code. Anyway, moving on. You can try it out in the deployed version. Basically, if you upvote in one tab, you'll see the upvote appear in the other tab if the query is polling. So that's how you get data with a query. There's also a place where you want to be able to upvote, which is a mutation. So let's find the vote mutation. Yeah, so here you can see a mutation. This is the thing that drives the ability to upvote one of the newsfeed items. Yeah, and that's pretty much about it. That's all I needed to build this app that lets you both submit items, vote on them, and check it out. So if you just go here and you start upvoting, you can see what other people have been doing. So yeah, so you can also run this app locally if you clone it from GitHub at our repository. And I just want to go over a few of the meta goals we have for Apollo Client, because I think this could really be a cool project. So the number one thing is being totally community driven. What we want to do is we want to build the best tool for the widest range of people to just fetch data in their app the way they want it to be. So I welcome you all to come submit issues and feature requests. I can help you find different ways to contribute, small pull requests that you can do to get this stuff going. We want it to be as modular and transparent as possible. So like I said with the Redux dev tools before, we want to make it easy to understand exactly what your app is doing and not have that happen out from under you. We want to make it incremental and compatible. So we're starting with React and Angular integration, but we want to have as many integrations as possible from as many different people as possible with any view layer or technology, as well as being compatible with any GraphQL server you can find that's spec compliant. And finally, we want it to be production tested, which is why we've started integrating into our own production apps starting about a week ago, and hopefully be deployed a week from now. So yeah, that was Apollo Client. It's pretty simple, not too many bells and whistles about it, but it'll get the data from your GraphQL server into your UI. So come check it out and come contribute.
All right, questions from the audience? We have one right here.
So how closely integrated are the pieces that make up Apollo stack? Like if I wanted to just use normalized cache or drop Redux from the stack, would I be able to do that?
So the question was, how closely integrated are the parts of Apollo Client? So for example, if he didn't want to use Redux, would that be possible?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's modular on the inside. Right now, you would probably have a hard time npm installing Apollo Client and using it without Redux. But actually, we were just earlier having a conversation on GitHub with some people who wanted to implement alternative GraphQL clients, but reuse some of the internal machinery about normalizing and denormalizing GraphQL data. For example, one thing you could do that would be really exciting is just use Apollo Client's normalization functionality to read and write from just plain objects. So you could populate your store or your object however you want, and then just use a GraphQL query in your UI to read that out. And one more thing I want to mention about Redux is I was talking about it here because I think it's a really important part of the implementation, but you really don't have to know how it works. We also have integration on the output end with RxJS. So you can do a query with Apollo that returns an observable. That's actually how the React integration works, is it uses the observable. That's how the Angular integration works. So yeah, you npm install Apollo client, do client.watch query, get an observable, and use it with whatever you want.
Okay, we had another question back there.
When you were papering over the GitHub API, was that client side or server side?
So the question was, the papering over the GitHub API, does that happen client side or server side?
It happens on the server side, and there's a couple of really great reasons why. And this code is maybe not the best code that you would want ever, but there's one really interesting feature of GitHub that has to do with e-tags and caching. So the GitHub API only gives you 5,000 requests per hour, unless I assume you do something that causes them to give you more. But we figured maybe more than 5,000 people would want to use this app in an hour, or maybe look at 5,000 repositories. And so there's this great feature which says if you fetch an item before, you can send them the e-tag, which is basically like a cache key, and it doesn't count against your rate limit the next time. And so this is kind of a feature that you want when you're accessing the REST API. And what we've done here, we've implemented something that we call a connector. And a connector is something that you call from inside your resolvers. So you just do GitHub, get me this API URL, and it does the caching for you transparently. So no matter how many GraphQL requests you're doing, how many different fields you're accessing, it's always calling this connector and doing that caching globally. So if you were calling your GitHub API from the client, you wouldn't even be able to do this. And I think one of the biggest benefits of GraphQL is the fact that the client doesn't have to be aware of specifics of the API, or even what different APIs are involved in fetching a certain query. So I think while it is possible to resolve GraphQL queries entirely on the client by calling the API directly, I think I wouldn't want to do that in my production apps.
We have another question over there.
How do you do pagination without something like relay connections?
So the question was, how do you do pagination without something like relay connections?
Yeah, so I guess one way to interpret this question is this app has pages. So you can click next page and you go to another page. But that's not really what the question is about, because while this is indeed pagination, it's the ability to look at different pages of a set of data, really does something with cursors, which is essentially allowing you to fetch a certain segment of something like a news feed, and then tell Relay to fetch more items of that news feed, and it remembers which ones it's already fetched, and only fetches the ones that are new. And Relay implements this via a specific API interface on the GraphQL server called a Relay connection, I think is what it's called. But basically that has certain fields that give it various cursors, the ability to get the next item, the previous item in the list. In Apollo Client, one of our main goals is to not impose that restriction. So we want to work, like I said, with any possible GraphQL server you can come up with. So our idea currently is to have pagination plugins. So remember when I told you about the phase where you manipulate the query before sending it to the client? What we want to do is have the ability for people to ship different versions of pagination that can be applied almost as middleware on the client on the query. And so you can have something that, for example, using a skip and limit, which is the most basic form of pagination, or maybe just page numbers, you can implement any custom logic you want to look into the store and see what pages you have already and manipulate the query in whatever way you want. So I think rather than implementing a spec that has a generalized version, I think I want people to be able to write any GraphQL server they feel like and then modify Apollo Client in the way they need to make it work with that schema. I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Have you considered using like a persistent data structures library like Mutable Js for normalized cache? Like, do you see any garbage cache?
So the question was, have you considered using something like Immutable JS for the denormalized cache on the front end?
Ah, Lee's right here. It's so exciting. The creator of Mutable JS, or maintainer. Anyway, we have an open issue that's like at some point refactored using Mutable JS. So it's one of the things that you could come and help us contribute. So I see a couple of benefits from using Mutable JS. So first, we're doing the kind of regular-ish Redux pattern right now, which says you want to be able to compare objects using triple equals to check when they haven't changed. And that's one thing we do already to avoid firing query modifications when we don't need to. But that requires us to clone objects all the time. And I think Immutable JS is perfectly designed to avoid cloning objects all the time to get a similar effect. And there's also a question in there about garbage collection. I think garbage collection needs to be a little bit more semantic with how the actual store is, what kinds of queries are being watched, and when you might want to load and unload those queries. So I imagine Immutable JS will make our development workflow much easier and perhaps give us some performance benefits in certain cases, but I don't see it yet helping us with garbage collection. Right now, by the way, the store grows monotonically forever, which it turns out is fine for most apps. Actually, it only grows if you fetch new data. If you refetch the same data, it just replaces it. So.
Okay, let's thank Sashko again for his talk.
Thank you.